Welcome to the program. We continue our conversation around the topic of modern parenting and the unique challenges that parents around the world face raising children in an era of online digital culture, of demanding workplaces, of evolving norms, and of increasing pressure to both succeed in the home and in the workplace. My guest today to explore a different element of this topic than we have before is Amit Kalley. He's the founder of For Working Parents. Amit helps leaders and teams redesign their day-to-day policies, habits, and simple norms so that parents and organizations can thrive without sacrificing their success in the workplace or time with their families at home. In this conversation, we get as practical as we can about the real-world issues facing parents, founders, entrepreneurs, senior executive leaders, as well as ordinary 9-to-5 employees. We talk about what parental leave and return to work plans can and should look like to support both employers and their employees in those critical early parenting years of their lives, and the tools that both parents and leaders need to have in order to navigate the environment we're in today, where you have demands that are growing and more complex, both in the home and in workplaces. I thought it was important for us to bring a male perspective to this conversation because we've done a good job in our previous episode talking a little bit about the unique challenges facing women in the workplace, but we didn't talk as much about fathers in the workplace. We also didn't explore the coaching mechanisms and challenges that companies might be able to offer to employees as a means to bring them back into an office environment. And I thought it'd be helpful to talk to somebody who's been going through this coaching, particularly in the education space, but just in general, helping leaders think about their policies, helping parents navigate this tricky moment in their life. And I also think that it's helpful to talk to a entrepreneur father who is living the very things that he is coaching people through. So I think you'll find this to be a fascinating conversation, a different perspective than we shared in our previous episode. And stick with me because at the end of the program, after the interview, I'll share a couple of quick thoughts, both on the interview and on the topic of modern parenting in general. So I am privileged to present to you my conversation with Amit Kalley. Amit, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, I've given an intro to our audience, to your bio, but nobody can introduce themselves like themselves. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about your story and what brought you to your work helping working parents around the world.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So my name's Amit Kalley. I'm based in London in the UK. I'm a former vice principal in a secondary school, a senior school, and about 3 years ago left the education industry and slowly set up this business called For Working Parents. And what I do primarily now is support parents in understanding the digital world that a lot of our children live in and all the harms that exist on that digital world, whether it's social media, gaming, communication, emojis, whatever it might be. But it's really to try and close that gap between parents and children in this crazy, ever changing digital world. I'm also a storyteller, so I share my story in the workplace, my own kind of life story. And that's mainly to help workplaces create this culture of compassion and empathy and one where we can really, celebrate vulnerability as a strength rather than as a weakness.
Let's talk about your journey because what is inspiring you, I'm sure, is just your own journey as an entrepreneur, as a working parent, raising children. Tell our audience a little bit about your journey, your experience with your own family, and how it revealed to you the gaps that exist in our marketplace today.
Well, my professional journey is one through education. So I graduated from university a few years ago and fell into sort of teaching. Didn't know that I wanted to be a teacher. I don't think many people go to university and say they want to be a teacher. But I fell into it, became a teacher, and then quite quickly sort of started progressing up the sort of leadership scale. I had a real passion for leadership, real passion for people, and real passion for taking people on a journey. And then became what we call here in the UK an assistant principal and then a vice principal. And I really was looking for becoming a principal of a secondary school and sort of going as far as I can. But I think a lot of things changed in my life around that sort of COVID. 19 period. And I really was looking for becoming a principal of a secondary school and sort of going as far as I can. But I think a lot of things changed in my life around that sort of COVID. 19 period. And I really was looking for becoming a principal of a secondary school and sort of going as far as I can. But I think a lot of things changed in my life around that sort of COVID time. And before it, I lost my mother to ovarian cancer back in 2018, and that was, she died 4 days before my 30th birthday and 6 months before my wedding. So that really sort of that whole process changed everything about the way I see life and the way I see the world and the way I see what we're supposed to do. We're not here for a very long time. My mother died when she was 56. That's definitely not a very long time. And I just thought, I can carry on doing this kind of 9 to 5 grind or even longer. And will I ever find satisfaction? I don't know. Or do I want to try something on my own? Do I want to see if I can, make an impact in my own way, on my own terms? And then, of course, I got married. My daughter was born during the first COVID lockdown here in the UK, and she was born very unwell. She was actually born with 3 holes in her heart, and we didn't know whether she would make it. Lots and lots of, I could bore you with her story as well. Lots and lots of kind of back and forth. Here in the UK, we have a hospital called Great Ormond Street, which is, a world-renowned children's hospital. That's where she was cared for and treated. Eventually, she had open heart surgery when she was 10 months old. And here in the UK, we were in the second lockdown, February 2021. And I just, all of this kind of was playing on my mind, and I was working at the time, and I was getting more and more unhappy in work. And I think post COVID, people were going back to work in this really sort of hybrid, flexible world. We started giving less of our souls to our workplace in the way that I think we were doing pre-COVID. Your boss told you to do something, and you would do it at 2 o'clock in the morning. Now suddenly we had this kind of, well, actually, yes, I know I need to work hard. Yes, I know, I have to earn a living, but there was more of doing it on our own terms. We weren't suddenly slaves to our employers. And I felt that I didn't want to do that. And education, I felt, was really not very inclusive. We couldn't work from home in the same way that my wife, for example, as an accountant, was able to work from home. And I felt that, I want to try things on my own terms. Bearing in mind, I come from, public sector work. No idea how to run a business. No idea about I didn't even know how to set up a business, believe it or not. Simple things like setting up a business and getting an accountant and understanding tax. I had no idea, because all my life I'd worked in public sector, worked in education, never worried about job security, and so I just quit. And I should add that I have ADHD, and as an adult with ADHD, certainly from my culture, it's really not talked about, really not understood, and that probably played a factor in me one Sunday in January of 2022 writing to my principal and handing in my notice. I had no idea what I was going to do next. I had 3 months of notice to serve. Did I use that 3 months to plan what was coming next? Of course I didn't. My ADHD brain didn't allow me to do that. I just rode those 3 months out, and then suddenly wasn't going to work anymore. And I had no idea what was next. Yes, I had some savings that we could eat into that would keep us going for some time. But, I committed sort of financial, suicide, I guess, if you forgive me for using that term, but it was really not a very sensible financial decision for me to make. But I made it nonetheless, and slowly but surely learned about setting up a business. I retrained as a coach, so I invested a lot of money that I had saved into becoming a coach, which I thought was really important to me. I love coaching. I love working with people on that front. Um, and then sort of in that summer set this business up, which again didn't really have a clear path. I didn't really focus on the digital element. It was only as I got more into it and worked on my, turned into my experience as a vice principal and all the problems that were existing between parents and children in that digital world, and thought, actually, you know what? There is space to make an impact here. There is space to work with organizations that support their working parents. There is space to work with parents. There is space to work with schools and colleges, because this world is just so crazy. And this digital world is changing at such a rapid pace that most parents just can't keep up with it. And so slowly but surely ended up becoming a kind of speaker, a keynote public speaker on this topic and on my story, and becoming a coach. I do some leadership coaching, mainly in the education sector, because that's where I come from, but also do some parent coaching in the digital space, and then do work with corporates and schools around bridging that gap between parents and children in that digital world. So it's a bit of a mishmash, but that is my ADHD brain. That's how it works. It doesn't work in necessarily one siloed function. I brought all these things together, and 3 years later, here I am talking to you on this wonderful podcast.
It is a story, I think, repeated in different formats, but with very similar themes throughout the entrepreneurial world. So you have a unique perspective because you were an educator in the classroom, in the formal education system. Obviously, as a parent, you have your personal experiences and the challenges that came with that. And now you're a coach and you're helping others through it. So let's begin with this gap between parents and kids and the understanding and the need. One of the topics that you talk a lot about is screen time. And I don't know if there's one topic that could be more universally understood and maybe controversial about how, when, and where screens should be introduced, can be introduced safely. Some parents default to using it as sort of the way to distract your child when you just need a minute to yourself. Talk us through that dimension of that technology, just the screen in front of your children's eyes, and your philosophy on this, and maybe your evolution even in your thinking about it, both as a parent and as a coach.
It's interesting because I have a personal view on it, which is, how I want to run my own home and my own family. But then I also have a professional view on it, and the personal is much more, as I'm sure you can imagine, much more kind of opinionated and potentially radical. My personal view is that children should be nowhere near screens until 16, 18, if possible. What I mean by screens, I don't mean the TV, but what I mean is an iPad, a device that connects them to the internet, a smartphone. Nothing good. The research is becoming more and more prevalent now because that sad experiment of children being in front of screens is about a decade old now. And the research that we're seeing in terms of the mental health crisis that young people are facing, the anxiety levels that young people face, the cyberbullying, the predatory behavior, the way online predators are now free to roam in places you think they can't get into. Roblox, the most downloaded game for children around the world between the ages of 8 to 12, is massively in trouble at the moment for the way in which predators are freely able to operate on that game. Snapchat and the dangers and harms that come from that particular social media app. Nothing good comes from Snapchat. You can see I'm getting very passionate about this because, from a personal point of view, I feel that social media has damaged young people. I feel that screens are damaging young people. I feel the gamification of education under this false guise of edtech. I have a massive problem with edtech because edtech comes from all these big players who say we're going to change the way education is presented. But EdTech actually isn't created for the benefit of the children. Most EdTech is created for the benefit of schools, colleges, universities, and that's important because I recognise that teachers are stressed and workloads are heavier. So if you bring in all this EdTech, it makes their lives easier. But then you have parents that have to download 15 different apps to access their child's educational world. One for homework, one for reporting, one for absence and attendance, one for classwork, one for phonics if their children are young, one for science, one for math. It becomes overwhelming for parents. So I don't believe that EdTech actually has the genuine interest of children um, at the forefront of their minds. I think EdTech is just another way for people to become very wealthy at the expense of our children. However, the professional in me recognizes that this is a pretty much universal problem that parents are facing, and a lot of them are facing it alone. They've decided to give their children screens. Rightly or wrongly, forget about that. Their children have got screens. So it's really important in the work that I do that I'm not judging parents or I'm not shaming parents for making decisions to give their children screens. What I then do professionally is work with parents, work with organizations that support their parents on understanding the impact that that screen is having on your child, making you as a parent more educated and upskilled and informed in this area so that you're able to push back if you feel it's appropriate, or you're able to have and help your child build a healthier relationship with that screen. You now know as a parent what the dangers of Snapchat are, what the dangers of Roblox are. I also work with parents on how to have those conversations. It's not a case of how was school today? The child shrugs their shoulders and says school was fine. Where do you go next? It's a case of asking your child every single day, how was your online world today? Did anybody send you anything online that you didn't like? Did you see anything online that made you feel uncomfortable? Did you send anything to anybody online that maybe you shouldn't have done? And it's creating that safe space, that non-judgmental space, where as a parent, you're almost walking that digital path with your child. So, yes, on my own social media, and the irony is not lost on me. Of course, I use social media all the time in order to spread my message and to get work ultimately and to grow my business. Um, but I think social media for adults is very different to social media for children. I, as an adult, probably have a better understanding of what to flush out when I see it, when the algorithm feeds me garbage. I have a better ability perhaps to flush it out than a 12-year-old might do. My 5-year-old daughter, for example, would have no hesitation if she was online in giving her address to somebody if they asked for it, because We've taught her our address because God forbid she ever gets lost, she would be able to tell somebody where she lives. Does she know not to tell a stranger online, not about her address? She probably doesn't. She's 5 years old, for goodness sake. So our children are not online in that way. Yes, they watch TV. Yes, they might watch a bit of YouTube in the lounge where we are with them, but they're not on any social media platforms. They don't have their own devices. They don't even have tablets. My daughter has a tablet at school, which her school gives to them. Hence my EdTech argument earlier, but her school has fallen for it and they give iPads at school, but she's not allowed. She's one of the only children at her whole school that's not allowed to bring that iPad home. I don't want her playing games at home, even if they are educational. I don't want her getting addicted to that device. So the personal me is very much anti-screens. The professional me is helping parents navigate that really complicated screen world.
So let's talk about the balancing act here with parents who are doing the best they can to run their household, raise their kids, but also they're working professionals. And many of the folks who listen to this show either run their own business or they're in a senior leadership position. And so there's a very demanding job, very demanding hours, and they have children of all ages. For the purposes of this question, let's focus on the youngest kids. So we're talking about, basically from the parent who just got back into their role after a few months of taking some maternity or paternity leave, up to about age, let's call it 6 or 7. Those really demanding early years of very hands-on parenting. Um, we know childcare is a challenge all over the world. Some people have the benefit of extended family close by, but many, many people do not. How do you help parents in that situation, demanding job, lots of hours, maybe not a super flexible employer, and a very demanding chapter of your parenting life? How do you help them prioritize their time? And what are the red flags you advise those leaders to watch out for, both on the professional side and obviously on the parenting side of their life, to not allow those to get too out of whack?
That is a great question. And I don't think there is a straightforward answer to it because culturally, depending on where your listeners are, what I say that might be relevant here in the UK might have absolutely no relevance in another country. And also, you made the point there that it depends on the kind of company that you work for. Some companies really embrace the parenting journey and really support their employers on being present. Other companies are very demanding and, you've had a baby, great, get back into work. We've got money to make. That for me is a red flag immediately. I think if you work for an organization that has those kind of views, or if you work for a manager that has those kind of views, I think is a red flag. And it's easy for me to say, get out. I know everyone's got their own financial situation and they've got to look after themselves and their families. But I think, somebody once told me that, because my children are still young, mine are 5, 3, and 1. So I've got very young children. Right? And, I often speak to parents whose children might be in their teens or in their 20s. And they say to me, they worked in an era where their children were young, obviously, and work was very much 5 days a week in the office, and you do as you're told. And they say to me, you never get those days back, and you don't realize how quickly those days pass. Now, I don't necessarily feel that because I'm living it right now. I'm living the chaos and the carnage of 3 children who are 5 years old and younger. And I, in my own mind, I'm thinking, gosh, when will this nightmare end? But these parents further down look back and say, you don't realize how lucky you are, how blessed you are to have those children. Make every day count. And I think those workplaces that allow you to, we're filming this now as we approach Christmas, that allow you to go to your child's nativity play without hesitation, that allow you to go to your parent teacher meetings without even having to ask, that allow you to come to work on time or at time after you've dropped your children off, or leave early, log off early, and maybe log on a bit later once they're in bed. I think having that flexibility is really important. And I'm not saying, be lazy. I'm not saying use your children as an excuse to be lazy at work. What I'm saying is find that balance between allowing work, having work allow you to be the most present parent that you can be. Because your children, when they get older, they're not going to care that you were earning $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 a year and busting your guts to earn money to provide for them. They're not going to remember that. What they're going to remember is that you weren't there. What they're going to remember is that you weren't present. You weren't there to read them a bedtime story at night. You weren't there to take them to school. You weren't there at their nativity play when they were looking out in the audience and every other child's parents are there. So it's really finding that balance between what's important to you in life. And if people listening to this say, actually, you know what? What's most important to me now is my $500,000 salary. Fine, I respect that. I can't argue against somebody whose priority is earning as much money as possible. Or if you're running a business, I know what it's like. You've got to graft. You've got to sometimes log in at silly o'clock and get that business going. I get it. But it's about making sure somewhere in your diary there is a nice different color, a yellow block that says spend time with my son or my daughter, or there is a block there that says nativity play, or there's a block there that says something that might be really important to your child, their dance rehearsal or whatever it might be, and trying to fit that in with your schedule, because your business will carry on growing. With God's grace, your business will carry on growing. It doesn't matter if you miss an hour. Ultimately, your relationship with your child later on, as they get older, is shaped by the decisions that you make when they are young.
Now, as you think about the parenting journey, of course, there are many chapters to it. First of all, depends how many children you have. Depends what age they are, what age you are. There's a lot of variables. So I understand we can't really give advice that is a one size fits all. But one chapter that does seem to be very uniquely challenging for parents is two parent households, multiple young children, lots of needs. Unfortunately, those kids at that age get sick a lot. Visits to the doctor can happen a lot. Unfortunately, sometimes, as you mentioned, there are underlying health conditions that have to require a lot more management than others. So that is the crunch that you hear a lot from professionals who are relatively new parents, couple kids in the house, lot happening, both parents are working. Talk to me a little bit about your view on what companies realistically can and should be doing if they want to retain that talent, but they understand there's a chapter of their life where there's going to need to be a lot more give and take. If you can get through that chapter, things might get a little bit better, a little bit different. I find that a lot of leaders want to do the right thing, but they don't know what the right thing is. That is both good for the employee who's going through that, but also meets the needs of the business and to be fair to their shareholders or their board members or their investors. Take us through how you coach folks who are coming to you with that situation. They want to do the right thing. They're good leaders. They're good people, but they're not sure what to offer as they see these situations among their own teams.
So two things come to mind when I hear you ask that question. One is actually the power of coaching. And I think back to work coaching is incredibly powerful for people that are coming back to work after giving birth. And companies employing coaches, not necessarily parenting coaching, but that idea of, wanting to thrive at work, but also wanting to thrive at home. How do I, as a parent, balance that? So I think if you're a leader, being able to offer that to your employees, I think, is something that is going to be beneficial for you, because what you want ultimately is the highest productivity possible from your employees. You want them to give you maximum effort, but there's a quid pro quo here. You've got to be giving them something for them to stay. Otherwise talent will leave. You look at the next generation that's coming up, and they get accused of being lazy, they get accused of being demanding, and they get accused of all sorts. And the world is going to collapse because none of them want to work. I don't necessarily see that as being as black and white as that. I think the next generation are willing to work. They want to work hard. They want to succeed. They want to earn money. They want to be successful, but they almost want to do it on their terms, and they want that flexibility, and they want that ability to be able to live their lives as best as they can whilst also working really hard. So I think those employers that embrace the idea that actually, if you think about managers, I've worked with managers who say, I need my employees in the office every single day. And I ask them why, out of curiosity, why is that? Because I need to see what they're doing. And for me, that says more about the manager than it does about the employees. That tells me that you as a manager have trust issues, because you need to sort of almost be on top of your employees every single time. Do you trust that those employees could get the job done if they were, spending 6 weeks in Madagascar? And a lot of them say, yeah, they probably could. Well, why don't you allow that to happen then? There's too much HR, there's too much red tape, there's too much bureaucracy. These are all problems that you are putting in front of you because you don't want to make that change, because a lot of us, it's the only way we've ever known. So, I think there's a key thing here when we talk about DEI, and I know in certain parts of the world there is a backlash against DEI, but I think the E for me is really important. It's not about equality, because some managers say to me, if I allow this person to miss, half a week because their child is sick, I've got to allow it for that person. No, you don't. It's not about equality. It's about equity. And I think that's really important. We don't have to give everybody the same thing. It's not equal. It's about equity, because your 60-year-old employee might not have the same needs as your 30-year-old who's just had a baby. But it's about making sure that what your 60-year-old needs, he or she gets, but what your 30-year-old need, he or she also gets. So if your 30-year-old who's just had a baby needs a bit more time, a bit more flexibility, and a bit more understanding, it's okay to do that, because your policy should be about equity, not equality. And if your 60-year-old is complaining about the time that your 30-year-old is getting, it's about managing that person and saying, actually, the point that that person is in their life as a 30-year-old first-time father or mother or parent, they need a bit more from us, because ultimately what we want is, we recognize that that talent is great. That's a really great employee. We want them to stay with us for as long as possible. But to do that, we've also got to give them as much as we can, to allow them to feel that, actually, you know what, I want to work for this guy. I want to work for this woman, because this person understands me, gets me, is allowing me to thrive at home. It's all about that productivity, and it's about that equity. Let's not obsess over this word equality, and let's not obsess over DEI. Let's just be good managers, good people managers, good human beings, because if our management is led by our human nature, if our management is led by our ability to understand people, those very people will give us 110% when they're able to.
Do you see a difference in the companies that you're working with and the clients that you have and the research you've done on this, maybe even going back to your education days, um, either a respect for or an acknowledgement of the distinction between the experience of a working mother and that of a working father? One of the things that we hear, and I've gotten some of these questions even from previous shows we did, was coming from the fathers who were saying, the women in my workplace get a little more flexibility and there's an understanding and they're seen as the primary caregiver, but I'm a caregiver too, and I don't get that flexibility. Are you seeing that in your work? Have you seen that through your career, that men and women are being viewed differently in their parenting role, and therefore what companies are willing to offer in their flexibility as they go through their parenting journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a huge difference. There is still a societal stigma associated with parenting, where parenting seems to be the mother's job. And the father's job is to go out and get to work and earn the money, and that is a big problem. It's a big problem in the Western world, and it's a big problem in other parts of the world where culture has sort of created those roles. Here in the UK, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this podcast, but here in the UK, maternity and paternity is absolutely shit. It is, amongst, for the Western world, it's amongst the worst. Paternity is garbage. Most companies offer what we call statutory pay, where you can take a couple of weeks off and you get paid just what the government offers you. The company doesn't actually pay you very much at all. You look at the Nordic countries, and you look at sort of Scandinavia, and how amazingly well they do at supporting parents. You can get a year off at full pay, and in that time you bond with your child, whether you're the mother, the father, whoever you are. You bond with your child, and that work is ready for you to come back when you're ready. It's just, if we could take that model, it's no wonder why, when we have all these happiness surveys, that the Nordic countries just always come up top for being the best places to live and work. The climate might be an issue for many people, but certainly the conditions are great. And here in the UK, and I'm sure it's probably the same in the States, depending on where you are in other parts of the world, we just do not give enough priority to fathers, I think, who say that actually we are 50% invested in our children. Yet mother gets a bit more than I do. So there are big campaigns going on in the UK about paternity leave being improved. And there are some companies, we're not there yet, but there are some companies that might offer now 12 weeks, 16 weeks paternity leave, and offer more money than, statutory government pay. But yes, I think, I'm seeing a lot of fathers sort of feeling a little bit aggrieved, a little bit pissed off about the fact that we don't get the same benefits that females will get. And it's not, we've got to be careful not to see this as us versus them. This isn't a case of men versus women. This is a case of parents coming together saying, we're in this together. We are co-parenting our children. All we're asking for is great maternity and great paternity leaves that allow us, parenting leave is what we should be calling it, really. We shouldn't even be calling it maternity or paternity. We should be calling it parenting leave. And it shouldn't be that one gets better than the other, or one has to take it at the expense of the other. It should be that we both get great parenting leave that allows us to bond with our child, be there for our child, care for our child, and be able to come back to the workplace refreshed, re-energized, and ready to go.
Now, as you think about this from the perspective of the entrepreneur, and now let's take the controversial questions because we do get some of these as well. The hard charging entrepreneur who has sacrificed a lot of time with their family, who is less pliable in understanding the needs of their employees, and their perspective is very business oriented, numbers oriented, and they have it in their mind that the bottom line is I have a business to run, I have shareholders that I'm responsible to. I recognize you have challenges, but they're not my problems. I hired you to do a job. You're here to help me meet my numbers. End of story. I'm sure you run into people like this.
Sure.
How do you help shift or soften that mindset? Or maybe that's the wrong way to position it. How do you help them to understand that it is about the numbers and that by being more flexible and being more pliable, you're actually helping your business? This isn't an either or proposition.
I think that's you've hit the nail on the head there at the end with what you said there. I think if you're an entrepreneur running a business and you've got to meet numbers, you're stressed. You've got shareholders to appease. I get it. I get that it's tough, and you need bums in seats because they've got to be working hard. And you've got somebody here who's saying, actually, my kid is sick, or actually, I've got to be off work today, or I think as an entrepreneur, you've got to think outside the box. Give that flexibility. If a parent says to you, actually, you know what, I need to log off at 3 o'clock, but I'm happy to log back in at 8 o'clock and work till midnight. What's the issue for you if they get their work done? Ultimately, what you want is your employees to get the work they have been set done. When they do it, or even we can go as far as where they do it from. I think is irrelevant. Yes, of course, there are some businesses that are different. You've got hands-on jobs, more manual jobs. You've got to be on site. I get that, but other roles where you're sitting at a desk, why does that desk have to be in an office? That desk can be anywhere. And I think entrepreneurs have to think a bit beyond, supporting your employees is actually good for your business. The research is showing that the more you give your employees, the more their productivity increases. Because if your employees feel like you care about them as human beings and you treat them as people rather than employees, they're much more likely to go the extra mile for you when you need it. So when shit hits the fan and you've got a big project and you need your team rallied around, they're going to remember how you treated them. They're going to remember whether you gave them the flexibility that they needed. And if you did, and if you were a good leader and a good manager, you can almost guarantee that the majority of them will be in that room with you until 2 o'clock in the morning working on that project because you gave it to them. So I think, we've got to see it as sustainable thinking and long-term thinking. Yes, your business needs crunch right now and you need people to work hard. But I think if you invest in your people, if you invest in those people that work for you, when the time comes, they're going to be there when you need them.
Now, one of the other trends that we see is almost the business community talking out of two sides of its mouth. On the one hand, there are many who look at the strategy of their businesses, they look to the future, they're actually concerned about the fact that more families are not having kids, that the demographic numbers in their countries, their target markets are not looking that good. And so you hear out of one side a desire to incentivize family formation and have more children, or if you have one, let's go for two. And then out of the other side, it is this lack of flexibility to enable that from happening. So, what I'm curious about from your seat and your experience is, um, do you feel that parents who are putting off that decision about whether to have the second or third child, that it is primarily driven by that lack of flexibility in their professional life? Or are there other factors beyond that that are underlying those demographic challenges? This is just one of many. What role do you think the company, the corporate world has in causing the very problems that they're worried about?
I think it's a combination of both of those things. I think there is a genuine concern from parents. A lot of parents are now having children later. They want to establish themselves more at their workplace, and they still feel that stigma still exists. That if I have a child now, I'm going to be held back. Especially women. I go on maternity leave. The men are going to keep getting promotions, and here I am, almost starting over when I come back. And I see this with my wife. We've had our third child, and yes, I run my business, and she also runs a business as well. But it's not at a stage where she can afford to stop working, sadly. but she's put her career on pretty much on hold. She's gone back part-time, and she's worried about what that says about her. She's worried about what her managers and think about her in terms of her commitment to her job. So I think there is a genuine fear that people have that actually the more children I have, are my employers going to take me seriously? Are they going to say to me, you're taking the mickey now, you need to leave? But I think there are other factors as well. I mean, gosh, the cost of living, the cost of children is just huge. The cost of childcare in certainly in the Western world, and I would assume in other parts of the world as well. You mentioned it earlier. Yes, some of us have the luxury of having extended family around where we can, leave children and they can spend some time with them, but many of us don't. And so we have to invest in childcare. And having a childcare is like, sometimes it's more than your rent or your mortgage. It's crazy. So I think there are various factors that are playing a role in this kind of reduced birth rate that we're seeing in many parts of the world, and it's driven by, I think, a lack of flexibility in many workplaces. I think it's driven by that stigma and that fear of what your managers are going to think about you for having two or three children. I think it's that fear of if I have children, I can't pursue my career. I'm going to be held back. I don't want to wait till I'm 40. I want that promotion now. And I think it's also that fear of just how expensive children are in relation to just how expensive life is in lots of areas in the world.
And when you're thinking about those conversations that might happen, with a client who is, let's say they're running a business, they're thinking about what they want their family life to look like. They're concerned about their commitment to literally their own business. Forget about even being an employee of a company, but just, do I have the time, the energy, the focus to build this business that other people are relying on me to build and grow? It feels like that childcare issue becomes an even bigger issue as a founder and as a leader than it even is as an employee. So, do you approach that differently when you're talking to somebody who's in a leadership seat or running their own company versus an employee who needs to ask that permission from their employer? Because sometimes people need the permission from themselves. And just getting into that mental place where they can give themselves a break is its own psychological barrier.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it is different. I think the challenges people face from a life and a work or business perspective is different if you are an employee or if you are a business owner, or even if you are a senior, a very senior kind of leader in your workplace. The challenges are different. And I don't want to sugarcoat it. I've worked with some employees who are lazy, who do want the easy way out, who do want to take advantage of their workplace, who do want to maximize what they can get and not put the maximum effort in. That's a human nature thing. We're always going to get people like that, sadly, in the world. And yes, coaching does help in some respects, but I think in some ways, getting coaches for those people is almost counterproductive because you end up reinforcing some of those views they already hold. Coaching isn't just for people that are weak and or people that are not doing well at their job. Coaching actually it's those that are successful that I think thrive off coaching because they work out the issues they're having and they get even better. So I think the strategies do have to change based on who is sitting in front of you. If it's a leader, their issues might be, gosh, my business isn't doing as well as it should be, or the numbers aren't adding up, and I've got shareholders to look at, or I'm trying to raise money, or whatever it might be. And yet I've got a family, and I've got my three of my employees that are about to have babies, and I don't know what to do. So it varies based on circumstance, but I think the key thing is again just to remove, to strip it back to the bare thing that we are humans at the end of the day, to remove that stigma that exists. An employee shouldn't be afraid to ask their manager for permission to start a family, or to want to spend time with their children. In the same way, a leader shouldn't be afraid to make decisions that are sometimes quite difficult, but also improve getting that flexibility in. Yes, having flexibility might reduce your numbers in the short term, but just look at those companies, those startup companies that have succeeded and that have these kind of wacky, work from anywhere in the world for 60 days of the year kind of policies. Those companies are thriving, because they're attracting the very, very best talent of that next generation that wants those policies, that wants to work from a beach in the Maldives, but when works extra hard because they've got that luxury of working from a beach in the Maldives. So I think it's finding that balance. It's removing that stigma that work has to be, in a suit and tie at a desk in some office in the center of town. We're moving away from that, and This doesn't apply to all organizations, of course. I'm generalizing here. For some organizations, you do have to be in a suit and tie because you're at board meetings. But I would argue that, board meetings, because we should be able to sit there in shorts and t-shirts, and at the end of the day, we're talking money. Who cares what you're dressed like or look like? But I'm going off on a tangent slightly. So I think the circumstance for me when I'm coaching, yes, it does vary based on who's sitting in front of me.
What are common mistakes that you're having to coach leaders out of that they think they're doing the right thing in their balance or for their company? Or maybe that was something that they were educated on that you have to help them overcome maybe some bad habits and bad learned behaviors. What are some common mistakes that you're seeing from the leaders that you coach and folks that you work with that you have to spend some time undoing?
So my coaching is a little bit unique in where it's placed. So I work with two types of people. I work with parents, mainly around that digital element that we talked about at the beginning. So that's the focus. And then in terms of leaders, I'm coaching educational leaders mainly, rather than kind of leaders in the corporate space. So I think educationally is probably where I can approach this question from. And I think the education space is, although it preaches inclusion and it preaches equality and equity, and it preaches, everybody should respect everybody. I think education is one of the least inclusive industries out there, because ultimately that work from home element doesn't really exist in education. It's hard to teach children when you're sitting at home. That flexibility doesn't exist, because if you want to be at your child's nativity play, there's a class of 30 kids that you're now leaving behind, that the school has to find money to get a supply teacher in for. So I think it becomes a bit more difficult, I think, when I coach educational leaders, because they're worried about the number of employees they've got that are part-time, which costs them a lot of money. They're worried about the public sector contributions they have to make, which aren't always government funded, towards pensions and maternity and all those kinds of things. So I think the scope of the people that I'm working with perhaps is different to those that work in the corporate environment, which arguably is a bit more cutthroat, and it is an element of, you can't do the job. Well, guess what? There's 100 people waiting to do your job. So if you can't do it, off you go, and I'll take the first in line. In education, it doesn't really work like that. To remove somebody from a public sector is a very, very difficult thing to do. So I think coaching there is more around, how can we get the best out of our teachers? How can I as a leader get the best out of my school employees? How can I bring in that flexibility? How can I bring in that thriving, inclusive workplace that wants to attract the best teachers out there? Because there is a teacher shortage in the UK, and that might apply to other countries in the world. And we're ending up with pretty poor quality teachers. Teaching has a pretty poor reputation anyway. There's that famous phrase, those that can do, those that can't teach. And we're trying to shake that rubbish off, because there are some great teachers out there that inspire that next generation. But sadly, there are those people that go into teaching because it's, if you want it to be, it can be a bit easy. And leaders need to get the very best out of all of their staff.
Well, even maybe from your perspective, I mean, you run your own business. You mentioned that your spouse does the same. Are there some mistakes that you made in those early innings as you were getting things started that you thought maybe you were doing the right thing or you were focusing on the right things, and then now with the benefit of time, you look back on, and if you could counsel yourself, you'd have counseled yourself away from that?
Yeah, I'm fortunate in that I'm a one-man band, so I run a business, but it's just me. My wife runs a chai business, a tea business, which is very much a startup. So again, one man. One day, hopefully, she'll have some employees, but I probably won't. So my looking back, I wish I had somebody that could advise me better on where to spend the very little money that I had. I think I wasted a lot of money on things that I didn't need to do. I spent a lot of money on getting a nice website put together. I spent a lot of money on marketing and branding and all this lovely stuff. If AI existed when I started my business in the way that it exists today, I think AI in the last year has just expanded so much. I could have saved a hell of a lot of money and time in just whacking a website together and getting some great branding material together, which would have cost me a fraction of the price. But at the same, on the flip side, that means I'm not paying money to somebody, a human being that is doing that job for a living. So there's an equilibrium kind of to find there. I think my advice would have just been, yeah, think about where you're spending your money. And for me, as an ADHD person who's unable to prioritize things very well, who is brilliant at procrastinating and brilliant at doing things that have no relevance to my business but make me feel good, I think it's a case of, get on those meds early, and allow yourself to get those to-do lists and think about what those priorities are. But I also want to make sure that I am as present as possible for my children. I want to be at all of their, as a dad, I want to do as many school runs and drop-offs and pickups as I can. As a dad, I want to be at the parents' evenings. As a dad, I want to be at the school events. And thankfully, I'm seeing so many more dads at these events that narrative that's existed in society where all of that is down to the mum is changing, and that's brilliant to see.
So as we wrap up, that's the question I wanted to end on was generational changes and shifts. We already know that today's parents parent differently than those of 15 years ago. We know a lot has changed in 30 or 40 years. And there's a whole new generation that is, it's coming into their prime years and they're getting married and they're going to have kids. So, do you see a generational shift that the younger and the newest of the new parents have a deeper empathy both in as employers and entrepreneurs, but even of their teammates and their colleagues than maybe prior generations? Or are you seeing any sort of natural backlash? Right, generations like to go against the grain; they like to go against the parents. Are you seeing any signs of maybe backsliding or a rebellion against some of the flexibility that we have seen in recent years? I'm just curious if you're seeing the generations uh, uh, differing perspectives and that is continuing to evolve.
Yes, definitely. And I can use my own personal story here. I'm a Sikh man of Indian and East African descent. So in our culture, parenting was very much, this is the man's role, this is the woman's role. Man goes to work and earns money. Woman looks after the house, looks after the home, and makes sure everyone is fed and watered and all of that. And our fathers and uncles are all very proud of the fact that they never changed a nappy, a diaper. They're very proud of the fact that they never went to a school parents' evening. They just got that information from the mother, and then they disciplined the child if that report wasn't a very good one. They're very proud of that because that's what being a father there meant. And they look down on us when they see us changing nappies and diapers, and they look down on us when they see us going to the supermarket to do shopping. They look down on us when they see us getting actively involved because they see that as not being the father's role. So I think parenting has changed massively as women, strive quite rightly for that equality, strive for better careers. And it means that if it's a sort of a husband and wife, a male and female relationship, then it takes that it means that the father has to be much more present. But thankfully, those fathers want to be present. I'm choosing to be present as much as I have to be present. If I had to be present and I was angry about it, I'd be unhappy in life. But I have to be present. But I really want to be present. I want my children to grow up thinking that actually there was no disparity between mum and dad. Mum and dad were equally involved in our childhood and in our parenting. But yeah, certainly from a cultural perspective, and I know a lot of Eastern cultures would have the same upbringing that I had, which was very much mum did her parenting role and dad did his kind of going to work role, and that was it. Now that's changed massively for the better, I would say.
If people would like to learn more about you, your work, your company, what is the best way for them to find out more about you?
Yeah, sure. So if you want to learn more about the work I do in the digital parenting space, in the coaching space, or in the storytelling space, my website is www.forworkingparents.com. I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok at For Working Parents, and I'm on LinkedIn at Amit Singh Kalley.
Wonderful. We'll put those links in the description of this program. Amit, thank you so much for taking time to talk about this important topic today, for sharing your views with our audience. And as things continue to evolve, we look forward to having you back to have more discussions like this.
Thank you, Brian. It's been my pleasure.
In a previous episode on this topic, I shared at length some of my thoughts around the need for businesses, governments, public sector, even nonprofits to adapt to the needs of the working parents among their ranks. So I don't need to go over those points of view, but I do want to share two things that were enlightening to me about this conversation and that I think are important for us to consider further as you absorb the content that you heard today. So, number one, the concept of coaching. One of the things that is timeless in every culture around the world is the need for anybody who's a new parent to get some of that coaching from their family, from senior members of their community, from those who've been there and done that and have gone through the trials and tribulations. I think it's very important that we not forget throughout our lives that we need to have people who are in a position to advise us about the pitfalls, the challenges, the mistakes, the things that so many generations have been through before us that they're still going through today. And for some reason, as we get older, we think we don't need coaches anymore. When you're young, if you're involved in any sort of extracurricular activities, there's always somebody in your life. Your parents are coaching you about life skills. You have neighbors, you have family members. If you're in organized sports, or even if you're in theater or in choir or in any profession, there's somebody who's teaching you, who's coaching you, who's mentoring you, who's showing you the ropes. And then we get out into the world. You leave university, or you leave your college life in the U.S., or you leave a normal professional education environment, and all of a sudden you're out in the world without a coach, without a guide. I think it's very important to take to heart counsel that Amit shared with us, not just because it's what he does as part of his living, but because it's a big need. And so my call is for two different actions here. Number one, if you are a working parent, if you are struggling with the balancing act, that is never going to be perfect, and there's always going to be trade-offs. But if you're not confident or sure about the trade-offs you need to make or want to make, find a coach. Get a coach. It can be somebody in your life. It can be somebody who does it professionally. It can be somebody in your community who has gone through this experience. It can be an elder. It can be somebody you admire in the workplace. But don't suffer in silence and hope that you're doing the right things. Go out, seek counsel, ask for support, ask for help, and you might be surprised how many people are willing to give you their counsel, to give you their advice, and who want to be helpful to you in your unique circumstance. But number two, it's important for those of you who are listening to this, who are through those tumultuous years where maybe you had 2 or 3 kids in the house, and maybe you were balancing all kinds of responsibilities while you were growing your company or excelling in your career. Your counsel is extremely valuable. And whether you do it professionally or you do it as an act of charity in your community, understand that your knowledge and experience can be extremely valuable to the people in your life who are struggling as young parents to figure out how to balance all the competing interests in their life. You're not an idle bystander. We know that we have an aging population throughout much of the world, especially much of the Western world. But that doesn't have to be a bad thing. That just means there's a lot of wisdom and a lot of knowledge that's sitting out there untapped that the younger generation can benefit from. So make yourself available and make it known that you're willing to listen to people's challenges and offer counsel and advice. And if you're in a position to do so, and you might be able to actually help with some practical issues of either mentoring those children or helping with a day or two of childcare, feel free to make yourself available. It's a great way for you to contribute to this challenge that we're covering extensively on this program. Now, my last thought for those who are neither parents nor who are currently raising kids or going through these challenges, I've said it before, I'll say it again. Understanding this challenge is critically important because we need to make sure that there is another generation that can step into the critical and important roles that our economy and our societies are going to need in the future. When you think about the topic of demographics, which we've covered extensively over the last 3 years on this program, the one thing that's not going to change in the short term, in most of our lifetimes, is that we are going to have fewer people than we have roles and demands in our economy. And yes, AI will help some of that, and maybe advanced robotics will help some of that, and all kinds of advancements in technology might allow us to make up some of that gap. But understand that it's only going to be some. There is no magic AI bullet out there that's going to solve all the challenges of our shortages in teachers, our shortages in healthcare workers, our shortages in construction workers and farmers and every other profession you can think of that has a skill that right now human hands are uniquely qualified to perform, or human minds and humans in general are best able to convey. And the next generation is going to be smaller in most parts of the world than prior generations have been. So when we're talking about this issue of supporting parents, understand it's really about the kids. Because the better you can have the parents spend time with developing those children, the better those children are going to be well adjusted when they come into the workspace. And these will be your workers of the future. They'll be your community leaders of the future. They'll be your government leaders of the future. Now, my last thought that I hope you consider as we think about the challenges of parenting is this. What happens if we fail to meet this moment as a society? What happens if millions of parents around the world decide that they have been put in an impossible position between supporting and raising the next generation or contributing in a professional setting to the current generation? My belief is that most of those people will simply decide to focus on parenting, that they will leave the workforce, which will irreparably harm their own household income situation and the standard of living that comes with it and their contributions to a consumer-based economy. But that it will be a logical choice, that they will focus on the children that they have at home. They will step away from the economy and they will step away from the workforce. And in doing so, we will have a hole in our economy that is nearly impossible for any level of technology to fill. This is what I need the leaders to understand who are thinking about policies that empower and support young parents. The consequences to your business, the consequences to your community, and the consequences to our world are substantial. For those who think that you can continue to push working parents to the brink and beyond and that they won't leave, they won't quit because they can't, you're wrong. They can leave, they can quit, they will accept the lower standard of living because they will prioritize their families. And if that leaves our workforce short of what's needed to support the businesses of today and tomorrow, it will affect your earnings, it will affect your productivity, it will affect the outcomes of your businesses, and it's not something that you can simply wish away or hope away or technologically solve away. This is a challenge that requires a meeting of the moment, and we rely on business leaders, on nonprofit leaders, on public sector leaders, on anybody who is in the business of employing humans to meet this moment and to do it thoughtfully and to do it gracefully and to do it to the benefit of both your business and your employees, because it will be to your benefit. And really, if you want to be a successful leader of a successful business, you have no choice. If you'd like to reach out to me with thoughts on this topic or any of the others that we cover on this program, I'm easy to reach. You can email me directly at info@brianjmatos.com. Find me on any of your favorite social media channels. And of course, leave comments on my videos on YouTube, both the full episodes and the clips, the preview clips that we share. And subscribe if you like what you hear on this podcast, if it helps you form more of your own thoughts. If you are enjoying this program, subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube, and share with your network, share with your family, share with your friends. We are always looking to grow our community of curious minds. Until our next episode, thank you all for listening. Look forward to talking to you again soon. And in the meantime, stay curious.